I record this, but I'm not the most technologically advanced person in the world. Let's see if they can see me out there. All right, guys, we're going to get the show on the road. Thank you for being here. Can I get your attention, please? So I'm going to pass this sign-in sheet around. If you don't mind, give us your name and email. You don't have to. That's not a requirement, but we'd like to try to keep in contact with people, reach out. We have a newsletter, that kind of thing. I'm trying to work on why some people aren't receiving a newsletter. What I think is going on, just simply some of these emails aren't getting uploaded. And then the other thing is that you got to write really clearly with your email. We're getting a lot of bounces, that kind of thing. So write really clearly with your email, and we'll make sure we get you on our newsletter. My name is Rich Jones. I'm the CEO and COO here at Favor Greenville. A little bit about myself. I see some new faces, so just by way of introduction, this is kind of who I am professionally. A master's degree in social psychology, MBA with a concentration in healthcare management. I'm a licensed therapist, a licensed clinical addiction specialist, certified clinical supervisor, things like that. These are all different credentials that allow you to practice in the mental health and in the drug and alcohol field. But in addition to this, I'm a person in long-term recovery. or maybe I should say even more important than this, I'm a person in long-term recovery. Took my first drink when I was 14 years old, just with some dudes in the neighborhood, that kind of thing. I didn't jump into it right away. It wasn't like I went from 0 to 60 that first day. I'm going to talk a little bit about the progression of addiction tonight. I'm going to talk about how it unfolds in a person's life, and I was kind of a classic example of that. I played sports. I had some other interests, and so they kind of kept me out of trouble, if you will. I was always on the verge of everything falling apart, but I had some personal motivation, and so I stuck it out. I did what I needed to do. Really, for me, what happened, and I want to go on the record and tell you, like, if there's something I didn't try, if there's a substance I did not try, it's because it wasn't available. All right? And I also want to go on the record that I was getting it done in the 1980s, in the 1990s, and it was a different world. And kids were not passing pills at my high school. I would have taken one of those pills. I know I would have. I'd have been one of those kids in the bathroom passing them back and forth. Heroin was not a mainstream drug. It was not something, I couldn't even tell you. I don't even know if I could have found somebody doing that. So what's going on is that the availability of certain substances has changed dramatically in our culture. I don't know that kids have changed, or I don't know that like impulsive people have changed, but what's available has changed. And so in 1999, I was in a car accident. I was sitting at a red light, and I've shared this story before. Just sitting there, and this guy just drives right into the back of my car. I'm sure to this day that either he was under the influence or he fell asleep or whatever. He didn't slow down at all. He drills my car, totals his car, totals my car. It's mangled wreck, right? And I walk out of there without a scratch. But I walk out of there with a documented neck injury. All right? Whiplash, they called it. I really wasn't in severe pain.
How old were you?
I was 29 years old. Okay? 29 years old. And I wasn't in severe pain, but, it hurt a little bit, that kind of deal. And I started to get prescription opioids. Hand over fist. This was right at the beginning of the they are not allowed to feel pain push that was going on in our society. And that's where it all went downhill, and it all went downhill quick, and it all went downhill in a way that I never experienced with any other substance. Now, I'm not here to tell you that opioids are worse than anything, but for me, they were worse than anything. And it took me to a real dark place. It included suicidal thinking. I thought I would be in the city of Pittsburgh, these buses would be flying by, and I remember thinking, if I step in front of one of these buses, something will be different. And that's not who I was. And a lot of times people want to judge. They want to judge people who are dealing with an addiction. They want to judge people that are dealing with a substance use disorder. And they tell themselves stories that make themselves feel better about it. Those guys are losers. Those guys are junkies. They're weak. They got this caricature and this stereotype of a person who's in addiction, right? It's a guy living underneath a bridge, somebody holding up the Sphinx, somebody holding up the convenience store, that kind of thing. I'm here to tell you that's not the case. I was class president. I was captain of the football team, captain of the basketball team. I had a lot of really good things going on in my life, and I was very, very disciplined in a lot of ways. But when these substances got a hold of me, I had no control and no power over these things. And I'm going to talk tonight about what goes on with a person whenever they get there. I found recovery through pretty traditional means, guys. I found recovery. I've been in recovery 16 years. Did it through a lot of 12-step meetings, did it through a lot of therapy, and then I got in the field, and that's when I went back and got all these letters after my name that allow me to. I don't collect these letters because I want to feel really cool. That was a joke a little bit. They allow you to practice, right? You have to do what you got to do to be able to practice in different states, so that's what that's all about. And I've been in Favorite, Greenville for 5 years. This is our 5-year anniversary. Believe that? If you've been coming here for a while, some of you folks who've been around from the beginning, 5 years, man. Pretty cool. I have a lot of different presentations. I have a lot of different options available in terms of what we talk about. Last week it was suggested we talk a little bit about stages of recovery, kind of what that's like, and the up and down processes, the process of recovery. We talk about recovery as being a lifelong process rather than a single event. You guys know what I mean by that? You got to be careful, because a lot of times you're going to be sent this message that's sort of like, let's go off to treatment, and now we're good to go. You're dipped in the waters of treatment and you're good to go, but we know that recovery is actually a lifelong process. So I can talk a little bit about what that looks like and how it's there's a lot of ups and downs in recovery. And if you've been through this with your loved one, you know that. But does anybody else have any other topics or any other issues that they want to make sure that we cover tonight? Any burning issues? Yes, ma'am.
We're in the same situation. Ours is when you were younger in high school.
Okay.
So ours is like, how do we deal with it and what we can do besides taking their phone and their cars?
Yeah.
Just things like that.
Oh, that's a great question. So the question is, what do we do? And what do we do if you know your loved one, your child is dealing with substances? What can you do to kind of try to push them in the right direction, set consequences, set parameters, that kind of thing? Yeah, we can absolutely talk about that. The hardest thing, the key thing with that is you can't ignore it. You can't ignore it. So what happens is, and I'll tell you, if you're willing to not ignore it, you're probably ahead of the curve. If we really want to get honest, what most people do when their kids are messing around with substances in high school, they cross their fingers. They don't want it going on. Nobody wants it going on. But they cross their fingers. They sort of hope for the best. And they kind of tell themselves this story that boys will be boys, girls will be girls. It's just kind of like growing pains. We don't recommend that you approach it that way. The other side of the coin, though, that you have to be careful of is how hard do you go at it? So you got two different ends of the extreme, right? You got one end of the extreme, which is I'm not going to say or do anything, and I'm just going to wait and hope for the best because this is sort of part of growing up in today's world. The other end of the extreme is I'm taking everything, I'm taking away all privileges, I'm going to push everything down, and you have to be careful in that way too because then maybe you get into a situation where the person pushes back. And this is one of the things, if you can get your kid to communicate with you on the issue. This is the hardest thing in the world, guys. Because if you can get your kid to communicate, that's a wonderful thing. But how are you going to handle when your kid communicates that they're smoking marijuana and they're drinking? But you want them to communicate that. But if they communicate it and your response is, give me your phone, give me your car, get up to your room, are they going to continue to communicate it? Do you guys get this? This is the dilemma. I lived through this in my family. I lived through this with my kids. I want you to tell me what's happening, but now I'm going to punish you because you just told me what's happening. But I can't ignore it because if I ignore it, I'm sending this message that it's okay. So I'm kind of like answering your question by saying, I don't know what the hell to do. And I'm a professional, that kind of thing. I can give you some ideas and some pointers and stuff that I think are universal that can be used with kids too. But I think that dilemma that I just described is the most important part of the process. If you look at things like that, when they talk about this idea of communication, this idea of being able to support somebody through these decisions that they're making, that's probably the key part of it. How do you keep that communication open? But we'll talk about that as we go through. Yes?
What about interventions? I don't know much about it. Some ideas have been dropped. My son's 29, 16 years.
Yep.
From alcohol to everything like we're talking about.
Yeah.
So, I know I get the idea it's going to be a special time and circumstance. Things have to fall into place, but...
So an intervention is always an option. I'm glad you asked that question. His question was, what about intervention? Is there a time? Is there a place? How do I know it's time to do an intervention? First of all, I want to go on the record and tell you that everyone in this room, anyone in this room, you can always do an intervention. And it's really never too early to do an intervention. Worst case scenario on doing an intervention, is what? It doesn't go well, it doesn't work out. The person kind of rejects that process. I guess that's a downside because you're sort of swinging for the fences, and if it doesn't work out, it might not feel real good. But in my experience with interventions, you can't go wrong. Now let me qualify this. I don't do the old school kind of like A&E interventions that you see on TV. You guys get that? When I'm saying this, I don't mean doing the apple pie intervention. You guys know what the apple pie intervention is? Hey, Rich, let's go by Grandma's house. She has an apple pie for you. And you walk in and everybody's in a room and you surprise the person. We do what are called invitational interventions. And invitational interventions are more like family meetings. And what we believe is you have to start by assembling a team. And this is probably the key part of this conversation. You cannot do an intervention if it's just you. You've got to have, we recommend at least 3 to 5 people to be involved in this. Ideally it would be 5 and above, guys. The more, you don't want to have 25 people, but the more the better. And you get these folks together, you get them to start coming to this meeting, you get them to come in here and talk to one of our family coaches, and they start to coach you through setting boundaries and having this conversation with your loved one. And how do you do that? You sit down and you get everybody on the same page. You have to make sure whoever's important to the person is willing to send the same message to the person. So if mom thinks it's no big deal and is kind of, okay in this behavior, and I don't really want to confront this because I'm afraid if I confront it, he's going to leave, he's going to run away from home, and dad is saying, no, we need to do something about this, you're going to have to come to some kind of compromise before you talk to that person. Every single person in that room has got to be willing to say, you need help, we need to get you into a facility, or we need to get you to some meetings, that kind of thing. But it starts with identifying a team. Then the second thing, we would recommend that you contact us and we sit down and we kind of coach you through it from there. You can do that over the phone. We have a phone coach that can do that. I can throw that number out right now, 864-430-1802. We'll put out some cards. We have some cards that have that number on it as well.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
864-430-1802. If you call them and you explain what's going on, and they can coach you through it over the phone many times. Basically, we believe having a conversation with your loved one, doing it in a group setting. My understanding, what I've been told, and what I've kind of seen in my own experience is about 60% of the time, believe it or not, that'll get the person doing something. Now remember, it may not get the person doing an ideal thing. It may not mean that they go off to treatment, but perhaps they're not doing anything and they start to see a counselor. Perhaps they start going to meetings. You want to get this person, a person's not going to find recovery sitting on the couch by themselves. Can we all agree to that? They need to start something. Now, I will qualify this. If it's dangerous, if it depends on the substance and what they're up to. You may have to put together that intervention team and go hard at it because you're very, very worried about their welfare. And that depends a lot on the substances and things like that the person's using. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess what I'm really strongly encouraging is start with that phone call to get a point person to kind of talk you through that. What other questions? Yes.
My son just got back from rehab last week and came to the family meeting, actually sat beside me because he hadn't been to any other meetings, and I said, you should go to whatever Saturday's meeting, you wouldn't do it, and he said, I'll go Monday night, and I'm like, it's a family meeting, but
yeah,
that's fine. So he sat through it, most of it, and that's the last one he's been to. I caught him meeting the drug addict other kid the other day. Didn't seem like he was messed up. He's swearing he's not doing anything, but he came in last night past curfew. I took his car, and he just turned 18 in September, so I'm kind of between rock and hard place. You lose a lot of power once they cross over the 18 thing.
Yeah.
And so he's not gotten a coach. He's not been here. He keeps saying he's fine. But
what you're experiencing, I don't know if you guys could hear, she's talking about her son coming back from rehab. You go off to rehab and you're going to do everything you're supposed to do. I'm going to go to meetings. I love meetings. I'm going to go and I'm going to get my act together. I'm going to get a sponsor. I'm going to get a therapist. And then you come back, the person comes back and they don't do anything. And this happens probably more than you think. Actually, I would make an argument that this happens in the majority of cases. The idea that a person goes to rehab and kind of gets conditioned to go to meetings and go to their outpatient appointments, that particular version of the story is much more rare than the version that you're explaining, especially with an 18-year-old. Mm-hmm. So it comes down to this idea, how do you get, and the group can answer this, you guys can throw it, but how do you get your loved one to do recovery? How do you get your loved one to do recovery? Do you just stand back and say, it's not my responsibility, there's nothing I can do about that. If it gets worse, he'll go get it. What are your thoughts on how do you get a person to do their recovery plan? Anybody want to? Yes, ma'am.
Well,
they come back to their old friends. I think you've got to relocate,
No.
find a place.
Not you personally, the
No,
person.
no.
Oh. But he lives with me, he's just turned 18.
Yes.
I'm not like sending him to
Yes.
another state, and there's a drug addict on every corner.
No, well,
But-
there's something to the idea, especially with young people, of getting them out of Dodge. Like if you look at the literature and the research around recovery with younger people that don't have a job and don't have a family.
He's in school.
High
school.
You can go to school other places too, and I'm not saying that this
He's
is
got
what
2 months.
that's.
left.
I'm not. Well, you wanted an answer. You know, I'm just
Well,
sort of
I know.
throwing it out. I don't know what to tell you. If I'm,
We gotta get finished with high school.
Do you have family anywhere that he could go and?
No. I mean, literally, if he's not like shooting up heroin, I think he's skipping the meetings and stuff. I don't think it's to the point that with a couple months left to finish high school that I'm going to yank him up. I have no family in other states anyway, but if I did, to haul him out of here.
well, let me ask. Why were you
is a bit
asking it then?
harsh. No, I think that he's on a slippery slope for backing up.
Mm-hmm.
If we can pedal and get him through high school, and then, okay, if he makes a huge mistake or whatever, that's a little easier, but.
So it goes back to the original point of how or let me rephrase the original point. Let's say you see your loved one heading for the cliff. Let's just say it that way. They're driving the car toward the cliff. Anybody have any advice or thoughts on what you can do in that situation, or what you would do if you were in that situation? You're sounding the alarm. You're probably saying something to them. Hey, you got to go to meetings. What would you do? How would you handle this? Because this situation is exceedingly common.
And maybe I wasn't clear. He says, yes, I'll go, whatever. I've taken the car because he came in late last night, 30 minutes. So his thing is, well, and he's trying to play hardball. You took my car, I'm not going to the meeting unless you let me drive. I said, I'll drop y'all. No, you can let me drive or I'm not going to go. But that's a week.
Yeah.
So he's acting like, well, next week I'll go.
And I'll just answer the question then. Here's the deal, and this is just 100% honest assessment of the situation. In most of these cases, there's you can clearly set these consequences. You can take the car, and that's probably the right thing to do. You take the car. You deal with the fact that he's not going to meetings. That is what it is. You try to send a message by taking the car. It's uncomfortable, though, right? Mm-hmm. It's uncomfortable for everyone involved. It's uncomfortable for you because now you're worried, but also who the heck wants to haul him around? Who wants to be responsible for all that? But you probably do it for what? Maybe a week. You try to send a message. What you're trying to do is send a message that his life is going to be inconvenient if he doesn't. And this may be similar to what you guys want to be thinking. Your life is going to be inconvenient if you don't do these certain things. And what I would tell him is, there are very clear things I want you to do. And I wouldn't make it too complicated. We've talked in here before about trying to avoid contracts that get too complicated. Don't make it about, 100 different things.
Got like 5 things.
Make it like 4 or 5 things. I want you to go to a meeting. It'd be good if you got a coach, those type of things. And you keep it as basic as you possibly can. And we would encourage you to have it center around recovery more than other things. Now, don't get me wrong. Depending on how old the person is, maybe they got to have a job and they got to support themselves a little bit. But for the most part, we're going to encourage you to stick. And then as soon as possible, I'd give him his car back again and give him another chance at it.
I said 1 week.
Yeah.
I gave him the option when he was late of taking a drug test. And last night, he was a stellar man. He came in, he sat down, he never talked to me, talked for an hour. And I thought, uh-oh.
Yeah.
But he was really nice. He sounded completely on top of his game.
I would get him.
He had to have done something because he talked about all kind of stuff that we never talk about.
I would get him back. I would try to get the car back to him and get him back in meetings as soon as possible. But obviously, you can't headlock him and bring him here. Well, you could. But
She just mentioned that. I was going to ask you, what do you feel about drug testing? Because we drug tested my
He
son
won't.
a lot.
She means in general.
He would give excuses. Well, I don't have to pee now.
Oh.
So here's the thing about drug
You're gonna
testing.
watch me?
If you're going to drug test, you're going to have to be prepared. And this is where you're really thinking this through before you kind of go there. If you're going to drug test, you have to be prepared to follow through with the consequences. Like a drug test is only as good as what you're going to do if the drug test is positive. you know. And if a person says, this is sort of universal policy around drug testing, if a person says, I won't take the drug test, they're admitting to the fact that they do.
That's what he did.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just not
But
right.
but even with that, you're still going to be stuck with this situation where you're saying to yourself, you know, what are the consequences that I'm going to give, and you know, how am I going to administer those consequences? And you also got to deal with the head games that go on in your own mind when you're doing that. And here's what I mean by the head games. The head games are things like, if I take the car, he's going to run away anyway, or he's going to go live with Johnny, or he's going to go out anyway, and it's going to push him to getting back to with those guys, with those kids. Can anyone relate to that type of thinking? You get into this like sort of like worst case scenario thinking, and it's hard to avoid that. It's very hard to not go there. But I don't know if you can see, if you go there and you start thinking that way, it's gonna cloud your judgment a little bit. And guys, I mean, I can't tell you exactly what the most effective consequence is with anyone, whether the person is 18 or 58. I know when they're 18, 19, 20, maybe like 16 to 26, let's just say for that range, you may have more influence because you have financial control over them. That kind of thing. If you're writing the checks, if you're paying the car insurance, if you're paying for the car, you have a little bit more influence. If the person is 40 years old living on their own, you're running out of control. That kind of
What
thing.
if you run out of money though? Doesn't it like take money to get an intervention and all that too? Like in more rehabs. Like we're almost at
You'd have
some remortgaging.
Yeah,
I mean.
And so you got different levels, and these are all great questions. And guys, try to apply it to your situation. We're talking about younger kids here, but it doesn't have to be about younger kids. This could literally be about, you know, your 40-year-old husband. It's the same idea. You try to identify how serious it is. What do you think they're up to? You call and get some advice. You have the meeting. From the meeting with the staff, or you can even do it over the phone. I want to emphasize you can do a lot of this over the phone. You figure out, what can I afford? Where can he go? It's not great situations, but people can go places for free. There are facilities that people can go to for free, that kind of thing. You know, here's the deal, and guys, you guys know me. I just got to be. You got to deal with the cards you're dealt. There is no ideal answer to these situations. The ideal answer would be that there is a facility available for each and every one of your kids. Today, they will go, they will be cured, and they will come back and live happily ever after. I swear, as true as I'm standing here, if that was available, I would give it to you. If I had that answer, I would give it to you. If I had some kind of super secret spell that I could put in if I was a Jedi, I would do it. I'd be like, you will not do those drugs again. You do not like drugs. You know, so what you're doing is and again, I don't know if other folks would tell you this or not, but I'll just tell it to you straight. You're going to deal with this in the midst of an imperfect system with limited availability of services and limited availability of specialty services, limited availability of services for adolescents and young people, that kind of thing. You're going to deal with it in an environment where rehab is exceedingly expensive. So you have to start calculating this. Now, what I can tell you are some of the universal rules or universal things that you can learn how to do around this. It is things like setting boundaries and mean what you say what you mean, but don't say it mean. And try to think with your rational mind whenever you're losing your mind. And I don't know if this has ever happened. This happens to me all the time with my kids, right? You know, you get in that emotional situation. They come in too late, or they, don't answer the phone when you call them 150 times. Not that I've ever done that. That kind of thing. And by the time you get them, you're worked up and you're emotional and you're angry. And what happens then? You say all these things that you may or may not mean, you know? And then what do they do as you're saying all these things that you may or may not mean? You get escalated. What do? They get escalated. Now they're escalated and they're saying things to you that you probably don't like. So now it's a whole different deal. This is offensive what they're saying. So what do? You crank it up a little bit more. You're never going to win that one. You want to step back and take a deep breath and try to have it from a place of reason. We've talked about this a bunch of times. If it's substance use disorder, if it's crossed that line into substance use disorder, you're talking about somebody who's not thinking clearly. Okay? Now, can you be 18 years old and not be on drugs and still be not thinking clearly?
Yeah.
Is that possible? Right? I mean, has anyone in here known an 18-year-old who didn't have anything to do with doing drugs or not, and they just tend to do what? Reckless things, not necessarily use the best judgment. Their brains are still developing, okay? This is part of the problem that you're dealing with. This is why it's important to, I'm not saying make a big deal out of it in a negative way, but make a big deal out of any substance use, because a person's brain is actually grown until the age of 24. And so the number one indicator on whether or not a person will develop a problem with an addiction is age of first use. I shared my story. I started at the age of 14. So, that's too young to be flooding your brain with all these chemicals repetitively. Now, it doesn't mean if a person's used one time that they're going to, wind up there. That's not at all what that means. It doesn't mean if they've used 3 times they're going to wind up there. It's if there's a pattern of use, if it's regular use, it increases the likelihood of developing a problem by about 40 to 60%. If there's one thing, if there's one law in America that's exceedingly important, it is this underage drinking law. If people wait till they're 21, I would make an argument if they even wait till they're 18 or 19, to tell you the truth. It decreases the likelihood of becoming addicted by about 95%. This is the stuff that needs to be taught in school. This is the stuff that needs to be talked about. Wait. And it's progressive, guys. It happens over time. So this is sort of like, this is kind of commonplace that you would see if you were in most rehabs, that kind of thing. You would see a progression. This is actually my story up here. 14 to 32 when I finally get into recovery. What is that, 18 years? That's a long time, right? That's a lot of stuff going on. But that whole time I got through college. I got a job. I got married. I had kids. I had all this stuff going on. I had all these experiences. And by the time I worked my way to recovery, I was ready for it. What you're doing with kids, what you're doing with younger people, is you're trying to figure out a way to keep them in the conversation, even though it's not going to be like that for them, because for them it's sooner. You got a lot of people. You were talking about an 18-year-old, so he's dealing with it right here. He can't relate to me. You see this? He can't relate. That's one of the reasons when you're dealing with the fact, and this is where I'm not making excuses for him by any means, but I'm just telling you how it is. This is why he doesn't want to go to meetings, because he can't relate. Because he's in there, and it's guys like me talking about, then I got married, and I got hung over at the wedding, and oh my God, she was pissed, all that kind of stuff. He's looking, what are you talking about? I never even did half those things. And so that's where you got to try to, and I feel like if there's any one thing that we at Favor can do, or if they have a therapist or anybody that they trust, who can they talk to that can help them work through that frustration about not wanting to go to meetings? Because it's going to be hard for mom to do that. It's going to be hard for dad to do that. But can you get them with somebody that they can talk to, that they can freely and openly say, I don't want to do these things. They don't make any sense. I'm in there with, I just can't relate. That kind of stuff. Well, any questions about what addiction is? I want to show you. You guys have seen this, but this is sort of the evidence of what you're dealing with. This is the brain disease part. You're not thinking clearly. This is actually your brain on drugs, if you will. The dopamine transmitter is depleted, and basically it takes over. All rational thinking goes out the door. Happens over time, and whenever your rational part of your brain is not running the show, your emotional or your instinctual part of the brain is running the show, and it's trying desperately to replace the dopamine that's in your brain, that's not in your brain. So that's what's going on in this picture. Yes, sir?
When one starts at an early age of 14, 15, and for 15, 16 years going on, does it cause their brain not to mature?
It doesn't really cause their brain not to mature. There are a lot of people who will say, I stopped emotionally growing at whatever age I used. I mean, that's just not true. That's not accurate. I didn't stop emotionally growing at 14. I had a pretty high level job a 14-year-old couldn't have done when I was actively using. But what it does is is it's hard for the person to negotiate the world when they're in recovery, when they're first in recovery, because they're used to dealing with the world from an anesthetized state of mind. So handling anger, for example, is hard for people in early recovery. Handling sadness is hard for people in early recovery because they've never actually had to do it. But it isn't that your brain stops maturing. That's not the phenomenon. The phenomenon is that dopamine is depleted, guys. When you flood your brain with dopamine, dopamine is the pleasure transmitter. Whenever you flood your brain with dopamine, too much dopamine is dangerous. And for some of us, for some folks, not for everybody, the brain will shut off the production of dopamine. When the dopamine is shut off, you're left in this desperate state. I don't know how else to describe it other than a compulsive, desperate state of seeking the substance because you're trying to deal with a brain that has no dopamine in it. Does that make sense to everybody? So if I'm walking around and my brain is like it is on my right, if my brain is like it is on my right, then I'm going to go after something to replace that. I'm going to go after something to replace that. Now that's probably not that may or may not be what's going on with your son. That may or may not be what's going on with a 16 or 17-year-old, 18-year-old. We really don't know. Yes?
So would you say that a holistic hormone dopamine would somehow help them with the depletion, therefore start thinking a little more rational?
Yeah, and you can get dopamine through a lot of different means. You can get dopamine through literally being in this room right now produces dopamine. Being in meetings produces dopamine. Exercise produces dopamine. Certain foods produce dopamine. And the good news, your brain makes a comeback. If you stop using and you stop misusing the substances, eventually this will go on again. This is not a permanent condition, okay? Your brain makes a comeback. And all the holistic things that you can do. Prayer and meditation increases dopamine. So that's what recovery is actually all about, guys. Recovery is this pursuit of trying to get your brain back online, for lack of a better term.
What about long-term, like 30, 40 years?
No matter how long you've been doing it, if you stop and you enter into a recovery process, your brain can make a comeback. Now, there are certain substances that might take longer. For certain people, it may take longer. But it's not. I want to go on the record and tell you it's not a permanent condition. Who had their hand up over here? Yes?
I'm curious as to what type of rehab you went through, if it was outpatient, intensive outpatient, or maybe inpatient. And also, is there any current research that connects DNA to any of substance abuse disorder?
So they're working hard to try to find a biomarker. They're working hard. There's definitely studies that indicate there are genetic factors involved. It hasn't been isolated in terms of DNA or anything like that. That it would be a huge development in the field if you could give somebody a definitive test that showed that they were addicted, because the hardest problem is it's very hard to make a person believe that they're dealing with this. It's very hard to get Rich to actually buy into the idea that he has this problem. Because what? You got this denial system in place. I can explain it away. If you look at these symptoms back here, guys, these symptoms, those are all symptoms. If you get 6 out of those 11 symptoms, you technically meet the criteria for addiction, substance use disorder, severe. But I can explain all those away if you give me a minute. What the heck? Interpersonal issues? That really wasn't my problem. It's not my problem she doesn't want me to come home drunk at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's not my issue. That's her issue. Can't cut back? I didn't really want to cut back. And, you can find different ways of kind of like talking about these issues. If we had a way of testing people where we could definitively say, but I'm not even sure that would actually work. Because what I think people would do would be test me again, test me again, test me again, test me again. That is not me, that kind of thing. I did a lot of 12-step meetings. I spent a lot of time at I wouldn't call it a rehab, but it was a farm, that kind of thing. Doing a lot of work therapy, that kind of stuff. Did a lot of therapy. I did probably the biggest thing was I did a lot of individual therapy, to be perfectly honest with you. And I excelled in individual therapy. I was a good therapy patient. I was becoming a therapist, and they don't want you to become a therapist unless you are okay yourself. Does that make sense to everybody? I don't want you to be all screwed up there out there trying to help people. And but I will tell you a couple of the things that I did for my recovery that without question are the most important things. The biggest, hands down, one thing that I did was I changed my environment. I changed people, places, and things. I changed the people that I hung out with and the places that I went, and I rejected and kind of got rid of all the triggers in my house. So I did not put myself in tempting situations. And if there was any one thing that I would attribute my recovery to more than anything else, it was that particular. That may seem incredibly simplistic, but when they said that to me, guys, when people said, hey, don't go hang out at the bar if you're trying not to drink. Don't go hang out with your buddies at the Pittsburgh Steelers tailgate party if you're trying not to drink. You get where I'm coming? I was like, I don't know why I found that fascinating and amazing, but when I heard that, I was like, these guys are geniuses. Why didn't I think of that? That was one of the key things. Now, you hear a lot about people talk about a spiritual part of the program. And for me, a spiritual part of the program was a big part of the program. There were a lot of prayer involved in my recovery. I'm a multiple pathway to recovery guy. I don't care how a person gets it. It doesn't have to involve prayer. But I can tell you that even if you don't necessarily believe in the power of prayer, which I do, even if you don't believe in that, there seems to be some correlation between kind of like a daily meditative, quieting kind of practice and success in recovery. And I think what that goes to is it has a lot to do with healing the brain, that kind of thing. But guys, clearly understand there is not one size fits all way to do recovery. Do we all get that? The way that Rich did recovery, that doesn't have to be. We believe that groups can be incredibly helpful. Here at Favor, we have a group every day. Many days of the week, we have 2 or 3 groups going on. But if you're not interested in Favor groups or you don't live in Greenville, South Carolina, you can go to a 12-step meeting any day of the week, anywhere in the world for that matter. Or maybe you need to maybe you can become part of a group at a church. What is it about a group that you feel like is so positive? Anybody want to share about a group experience? What do you think happens in group? Yes, sir.
I feel like I've been fighting this battle alone, and then I come here and I say, hey, I'm part of a team.
Yep.
It's like maybe a fraternity.
Yep.
I'm not alone. So
that's right. That's the biggest thing. As soon as you walk in and you're in an area where you know people are there for this certain topic, whether it's family recovery or their own recovery, you literally have this sense of universality. Whoa, I'm not alone. Other things that happen in group, you might get a chance to help another person. That can be incredibly therapeutic. The other thing is you're more likely to get variety of information in a group than you are in a one-on-one setting. Okay? If you're one-on-one and we're talking in a counseling setting, you're only going to hear Rich's opinion. But if you're in a group with 40 other people, 40 other parents, for example, you might get 40 other ideas, and you might just hear something and say, I never thought of that. I'm going to try to do that. So all those things. Yes, ma'am?
Can an addict become clean if they don't go to meetings or anything?
Yes. Yes, they can. Is it harder? Yes. In my opinion, it's much harder. We encourage people to go to meetings, guys, and we encourage family members when it comes down to it to encourage their loved ones to go to meetings because it's the biggest predictor of success. So, we don't fight with people about it, though. If there's a person, I've known people who've got it through like individual therapy, for example. I got to tell you, there are people who will tell you that they just got recovery. They'll literally tell you, like, I just sort of woke up one day and I got recovery. I never went to those meetings. I never went to see a therapist. But if you talk to those folks, frequently you find out they did some things. They changed some people that they were hanging out with. They became part of a men's group at church. They just never thought of it as a recovery group, if that makes sense. Yes, Cynthia.
I'd like to address what she just said. My son, several years ago, just to give the background to them, overdosed from heroin. We were clueless, and it was a result of heavy partying in college, and it was progressive. And we did the recovery center, we did everything. He came here several times, and then his attitude, I've got this.
Yes.
And for several years. And I don't know that he was totally straight. I don't know. But he's very intelligent. And what I'm saying is, if I could have convinced him to stay with the meetings, to hang in there with the meetings, then this second event, relapse, would probably not have.
Yeah, there's something to it, guys. And again, yeah, we're gonna celebrate a person's recovery no matter how they get it, and we're not gonna pick fights with people about it. But there's absolutely something to coming to meetings and being around other people. At the very least, what it's doing is it's reminding you of the goal of not using. You follow me? If I'm around 30 other people who are also trying not to use, it's reminding me of that goal. And that in and of itself can keep a person on the right track. The problem is people get frustrated. They will go to a meeting. They'll have a bad experience. Maybe somebody said something sideways to them. And what do? They write it all off. Screw that. I'm not going back to those meetings. That's where it gets difficult, and that's also where we think an individual person, like an individual coach or a sponsor or a therapist, can help talk them through that. Well, let's talk about that. Is that the only meeting in town? Couldn't you go to another one? Couldn't you try another type of meeting? That kind of thing. We feel like that could be very, very important. Mary Kay, were you going to say something earlier? Did you have your hand up? You forgot, didn't you?
That was a long time ago.
Okay. Yes.
Would you say that addiction is trying to get to the core of it? I mean,
so there's a
would you
lot
say
of
it's
work.
Like a living problem or a coping problem for
Yeah.
them to numb it out, or how would you explain that? Like,
There's huge connection between different types of issues inside a person. You'll see like co-occurring disorders, things like anxiety and depression. You'll hear about trauma. You hear about this thing, adverse childhood experiences. All these things can kind of contribute to that. At the end of the day, I believe that there's a neurobiological change that occurs. I know in my case, I was attracted to using. I grew up in a home, my father had a problem with substances, and I grew up in a very violent home, if you will, and so I was traumatized. And so substances had a huge payoff for me. Now but I want to go on a record and tell you that doesn't have to be the case. Frequently it is, and you'll hear people talk about you got to get to these core issues. Mm-hmm. But you got to be careful with people who are champions of core issues. What I can tell you is that there's no singular solution to this thing. Where like all of a sudden, and I feel like that's the bad part. That's where we've done a bad job conveying to the general public. That's where people actually get the idea that so-and-so can go to rehab and then be okay. Because there's this idea that you go and something happens, and either you work the steps, or you have the right therapist, or you have the right trauma therapist, or if you go to the right rehab, you got the right equine therapist, right? And your horse was really cool, and you have this cathartic experience, and you get through your core issues, and you have this spiritual awakening, and now you're good to go. That is incredibly dangerous.
you have to come back out and learn how to live again, real life again.
And there's just the reality of dealing with the way that the psychology is around it, and the way that you have to continuously. I don't know if any of y'all in here have tried to change anything, a diet or a workout routine or smoking. Think about how conscious you have to be of it. Think about how you have to kind of like stabilize your environment. You have to be smart about where you're going. There's a reason why one of the most popular weight management programs is Weight Watchers, and it's done in a group. I mean, think about that for a minute. Weight Watchers is incredibly successful, multi-billion-dollar organization because we put people in a group to hold each other accountable. The danger is I got my core issues taken care of. Now I'm good to go. Because now I'm going to be by myself and I'm going to be at home. And if those temptations come up or those thoughts come up, who do I have to lean on? Or who's reminding me of not going back to that? But again, I want to go on the record. If somebody's doing recovery and it's working, just keep doing it. If you're standing on your head every day, if your loved one stands on his head every morning for a half an hour and he's been clean for like a year, buy him a pillow. Keep it going. Hold his feet or whatever it is. Now, yes, ma'am.
Would you suggest an addict, like say my son's an addict, coming to one of these meetings with me and listening to all of this?
Yeah, I think coming to this, especially one of these lecture meetings, So the question was, would we suggest one of your loved ones come to a family meeting? I think it'd be harder if it was a regular group share, but I think if it was a lecture, educational meeting, I would definitely encourage people to come. On your end, and it definitely applies to what you guys are dealing with as well. You know, whether it's substance misuse or addiction in the classic sense, you have to figure out a way, how am I going to get comfortable talking about this? How are we going to talk about this incredibly scary issue in a calm, kind of educated way? And what do I need to know about these issues in order to be able to do that? That kind of stuff. So I'm going to give an example for what you guys are dealing with, and I'm not sure how exactly old your kids are, but I deal with things with my kids, and one of the things that I've noticed, and one of the things that I've done, is I've avoided the great marijuana debate. You guys know what the great marijuana debate is?
I hear it all the time.
You hear it all the time, right? The great marijuana debate. Marijuana is not a drug. It comes from the earth, like a goat or an apple. That's what I had a kid tell me that, and I said, "You can smoke a goat?" So marijuana comes from the earth. It's like a goat or an apple. You don't understand, Mr. Jones. It's no big deal, man. That kind of stuff. It really isn't even addictive. It's legal. It's medicine. So what I want to tell you about the great marijuana debate is it's almost an impossible debate to win. So if you find yourself being drug into the great marijuana debate, you want to almost avoid it, because the more you argue against marijuana, what does the other person do? They argue for marijuana. Okay? And the more that they talk about it, the more they convince themselves. And you got to be careful. I did a talk at Carolina High. I talk at the high schools, and I did a talk at Carolina High School not too long ago, maybe last week, I think it was. And man, these kids just challenged me about marijuana right away. And you know what? But I knew what they were doing, and I knew what they wanted to do was write me off. They wanted to write me off as just this overreactive old dude. And if I was as old as you, I wouldn't do drugs either, Mr. Jones. That kind of thing. And so, they immediately start like challenging me about marijuana. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to hook me. And what they want to do is they want me to say, like, it's dangerous, you better not do it, you can die from it, it'll kill you, it's addictive. They want me to say all these things, because if I say that, they're not going to listen to another word I say about any drugs. You guys follow me? So I don't okay marijuana. I do not okay marijuana. But I will tell you, I avoid the conversation. Okay? And if we do go there, I usually stick to something like, look, I can't even deal with that right now. It's illegal. I don't know what else to say other than it's illegal. But I don't try to win the great marijuana debate. Okay? I try to bring in other things and other substances. I try to bring in other issues. And so let's talk about that real quick and go over some of the stuff that I emphasize and that I want my kids to know. And if I was talking to kids, this is the stuff that I would go at. So let's see here. Let's sort this by name. Oh goodness, too much stuff on here. Let's see here.
The biggest thing with marijuana is it's going to keep them from getting any kind of decent employment if they don't get off of that. Because they're going to drug test them anywhere.
Yeah, you can say stuff like that because it's realistic, and they're not gonna, they're not gonna necessarily. They're gonna tell you like, I don't really care about that, but they're not gonna actually. They're not gonna actually get upset about that.
Do they think it's a gateway drug?
No, it's not a gateway drug.
It really is not.
Marijuana is not a gateway drug. A gateway drug would be a drug that the majority of people who use the drug wind up doing other drugs, wind up doing harder drugs. The majority of people who use marijuana do not wind up doing harder drugs. But almost everybody who's doing harder drugs use marijuana. But it's still not a gateway drug in the classic sense. Now, marijuana in and of itself is a problem. Marijuana in and of itself is a problem, and for about 9% of the population, it's just straight up addictive, and it'll destroy your life like alcohol or pills or cocaine for about 9% of the population. And what I mean by that is they'll put it ahead of everything. They'll put it ahead of family members. They'll put it ahead of their own personal welfare and stuff like that. So it is addictive. But again, you're not going to win that argument. And guys, the main reason you're not going to win that argument is, for better or for worse, I was just in Pennsylvania this weekend. My home state is now a medical marijuana state. You know, and I was talking to a lot of my colleagues who, you know, I'm helping them out with stuff, and there's things going on, and there's moves going on in Pennsylvania. And I got to tell you, the fact that it's a medical marijuana state has totally changed the mentality around marijuana. The term medical marijuana is incredibly misleading. It makes it, not only is it okay, what does it sound? It actually sounds safe. Man, I should get a hold of some of that. My foot hurts. You know the thing about marijuana prescriptions, you know how when you get a prescription it says take 1 pill 4 times a day? With marijuana it says dosage to be determined by user. So it's not like take 1 puff 4 times a day. It's like, doesn't feel better yet. Doesn't feel better yet. So, but here are the things that you know that we really want people to be aware of. And this is fentanyl. Okay? So this is where we get into the heavy duty stuff, and this is where we get into the real fears, and this is the stuff that keeps me up at night as a parent. Okay? And it is a different world. It just is. By way of reference, you have a penny, and then this is the fatal amount of fentanyl. So you're looking at about a pinch, essentially, kind of like picture like a pinch of salt. So what happens is that gets mixed with other substances, mostly with heroin, and what they can do is they can cut it with heroin, and they can just have more product to sell. It literally stretches the product, but one of the problems with kids, and what we want kids to be aware of, and I noticed when I told these kids at Carolina. When I went over this with them, they were listening to me. I'm telling you, I had them this information. They're also turning it into fake pills. So what you have here on the bottom, you have legitimate Percocet, or excuse me, this is hydrocodone. So this would be like Lortab or Vicodin, okay? And up top, you have a fake version of that. And when this was tested, it actually had fentanyl, promethazine, acetaminophen, and cocaine. Okay, so this is what we're trying to really talk to people about. We really want to get them aware. And again, when I say this, I'm not saying marijuana is okay. But what I'm saying, whenever you're having these conversations, can you take it to another level where you're saying, like, do you guys really know what you're messing with out there? Do you really know and understand, you know, exactly what's going on? These are other fake pills, same kind of deal. These are a little bit easier to see. These are counterfeit Percocet. They're yellow. And then one of the big problems we have here is Xanax. So what you have is you have real Xanax and fake Xanax. So they buy whatever substance and they turn it into this fake counterfeit pill. This is the information that we're really trying to get out to the kids. This is the information, and you really don't know what you're taking. That's the conversation I'm encouraging you all to have, you know, with whatever stage the person's in. Actually, not even with kids. It could be any age. You know, Xanax is an extremely popular drug right now in the upstate of South Carolina. I would make an argument in terms of abuse, it's more than pain pills. Xanax is everywhere. So can you get people in touch with, how do you actually know what you're taking? How do you know what this, you know, whenever you're grabbing this, do you actually know, is it from a pharmacist? Is it what it says it is? Or is it just some dude who's kind of like stamping these things? You can buy one of these pill presses. My understanding, they're about $1,000, so they're kind of like expensive, but obviously you make your money back relatively quickly. So this is all stuff that you start to think about, like educating. It doesn't change like how you handle it in terms of consequences and things like that, and that you have to address it, and you have to look at all your options, whether it's phone, whether it's taking the car, that kind of stuff. Sometimes maybe you connect the consequences to seeing a person. Go see a therapist, go talk to a counselor, that kind of thing. Any questions about these substances?
Yeah, what do you say when they say, oh, but I got it from my friend? My friend wouldn't do that to me.
No, I know, they do say that, and it's one of the stupidest things anybody could say, because your friend doesn't know either. It's not that you know what I would say to that? I'd say absolutely your friend would never do that to you, but understand that your friend doesn't know either. You know, that you really honestly don't know. And whenever they're partying and they're doing their thing, you know, we might be able to look at this picture and tell that this is a fake, but when they're doing their thing, you know, it's not, they're not examining it. They're just sort of taking it and running off and doing their thing. Cynthia?
I have to ask you about CBD oil.
Oh, yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is cannabis, and it is sold legally in all 50 states. but
Yeah, it's not- okay.
THCs have been taken out.
Yeah, in some states THC is still in it. Here, there is no THC in it. So there would, if somebody came to me and said they were taking CBD oil, I wouldn't really even think twice about that. That would concern me not at all. If they were buying it like down at Garner's or something like that, I guess if they were ordering it over the internet, that would be a problem. But the CBD oil that's problematic still has THC in it. So what it is here is hemp. It's really the hemp oil that we have. What other questions about the substances, guys?
The fake pill, is there something in it that will harm them, or?
Yeah, there's different things in it, and they really don't know what's in it. And the substance that can harm them most of all, is fentanyl. And it'll just be put in there, and it'll be put in there to make it more powerful, and it'll be put in there because it's very powerful, and you don't need a lot of it to kind of get that effect. You don't need a lot of this substance. Yes.
So it's put in there to stretch the product for the dealer,
Yes.
so to speak.
Yes.
Because the dealers don't want their users to die.
No.
That's their money.
That is. You're absolutely right.
But
You're
they're
absolutely
trying
right.
to stretch the product enough. And
Well, they're trying to
but
get a bigger
fentanyl does
dose
kill
out.
these kids.
It does.
Mhm.
The fatal dose is what I showed. What other advice? Yes, sir.
I heard about it and I read about it, about a girl in Anderson County who gouged out her own eye.
That was methamphetamine.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that also had some other underlying mental health issues. So here's
I heard there was something, not to interrupt, it's called Flocka or something like that, it was something in it that was even worse than the meth that they threw in there. I don't know if that's true or not. They gave her supernatural strength to be able to do that, and, it was beyond.
So I think what you got to watch out for, and I don't know that case really, really well. I think, that a lot of times if there's underlying mental health issues and a person's doing methamphetamine, you can have really, really bad results like that. You can have, I don't know, one of the things about Flocka and bath salts and things like that, guys, that's not really a threat here in the upstate of South Carolina. I don't know that I could tell you more than 5 cases that we've dealt with here at Favor Greenville, and it was bath salts. It wasn't Flocka. Flocka is really, really sensationalistic. It's always going to be on TV because it's always a really wild story. I'll be honest, the thing that we have to worry about as parents and the thing that we have to worry about as helpers is it's much less dramatic than that. It's the ongoing everyday use that escalates into something else. It doesn't necessarily wind up being a dramatic incident like that. And it's this, it's these unintentional overdoses based on these other substances that are getting passed around that we all have to, that changes the game a little bit. It goes from this situation. Remember how I was talking about earlier that you don't want to be, let me just close my eyes to this and hope for the best. One of the reasons why you don't want to close your eyes and hope for the best is because of these very powerful synthetic opioids that are out there. That ups the ante on everything. And it changes the conversation a little bit from where it used to be. Parents, husbands, wives, that kind of thing. If you're still connected to your loved one, you're going to have to have these conversations. You can't. Nobody talked to me about anything. Let me go on the record and tell you that. Nobody said anything when I was coming up and doing my thing. And I would have taken any of those things, guys. And would I have taken it because I wanted to die? No. Would I have taken it because I wanted to willfully defy my mom? No. Why would I have taken it? Oh, because it's a fun night, whatever. So how do you talk to your kids? How do you talk to your loved ones in a way that they're going to hear you about those substances? That's what I'm encouraging you guys to take away from this. Even more than what the consequences are and stuff like that. How do we start having real realistic conversations with kids? And I'm on Facebook Live right now, so this is going to be recorded for the world. the way that we're going to do it is we're going to quit talking about marijuana. Because if we talk about marijuana, they're going to write us off. If you're out there, you little potheads, we're going to quit talking about marijuana, because if we talk about marijuana, they literally say that dude's nuts. That guy's crazy. Because remember, we're talking about what? How many states are legal now? 3 or 4 total recreational legal. What? Countless. I can't even keep up with the number of medical marijuana states. We've lost that argument, guys. We've lost that argument. What you can do with marijuana is you can do things like, there's still laws around being 18. You got to wait till you're 18. It's kind of like cigarettes. Cigarettes aren't okay either. You can have those type of conversations, but you can't have the reefer madness type conversations. You guys know what I mean by the reefer madness conversations? Anybody remember the movie Reefer Madness? Or they literally have a dude smoking marijuana and running and jumping out a window, and they say that like marijuana will make you rape women and rape and pillage in the streets. It says that type of stuff. That is not going to work anymore. We want to talk in a way where people are actually going to hear us. All right. What other comments about any of those subjects that we talked about so far? Anybody want to add anything to that? Anybody remember the name of the presentation that I was doing before I went on this tangent? Anybody remember what it was?
Stages of addiction.
Was it called Addiction and Recovery? Okay. This one. Let's see here.
Seniors still have some.
This is the one. Okay, so this is. We talked about that. Okay, this is a different one. My bad. I have another addiction recovery on this page over here, I'm sure. Hey, I got a lot going on, guys. Settle down. This should be it. All right. Yes, I need a 12-step program for me. All right. So let's talk about the stages of recovery and what you can expect and what this process is like. And again, I think probably one of the biggest things I can say about this is recovery is not linear. Recovery is not we enter into recovery and we go in life, is happy ever after, right? I woke up on a Wednesday, today was a good day to go to rehab, I went to rehab, and boom, I'm in recovery forever. It's not like that. Recovery tends to be 1 step forward, 2 steps back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The most important thing that a person can do in recovery is not quit. If there's one thing that one takeaway for people who come to meetings and for their families, that really the process is, think of it as a pathway to recovery. Think of it as a road or a path in the woods. Somebody has to pull them back on the path every time they fall off. Pull them back on the path every time they fall off. Understanding that there are limitations to that. There are limitations on the amount of money that you can spend on that. There are limitations on whether or not they're going to let you pull them back on the path. Sometimes they're going to go off the path and they're going to hide behind the trees and you're not going to be able to get them. But the idea is, can you keep them coming back on the path, coming back on the path, coming back on the path, and then they find recovery. Does that make sense to everyone? It's kind of like this. It's sort of, I was going to try to walk right through there. How many people have seen me do that? Yep, I've done that before. So we want recovery to be like this. This is how we want it to be. And we wish it was. We wish recovery was like Rich starts here and he goes and everything works out. Everybody's happy. That's how we wish it. But recovery is really like this. For all of us. For anyone who's in recovery, this is what it really is. And then if you keep coming, then you're going to get it. That's the truth of the matter. As you get older, it's more likely you get it. I know this is bad news. This is not what we want. Because I feel your pain. Because what you're thinking is how much of that can I deal with?
Is it always like that?
No, it's not like that. It's like it's not always like that. And people start getting it, and people are getting it younger and younger. People are getting it, and the key part to it is to like don't give up on the process. And I guess I'm talking to you guys. I really should be talking to your loved ones. Don't give up on the process. Keep coming back to the recovery process. Keep coming back to the recovery process. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You guys are only going to be able to do so much. You're going to have to try to influence them to come to meetings, encourage them to come to meetings, set boundaries around coming to meetings. And eventually, a person will find recovery. But we all want to quit. We all want to quit. I remember going to a 12-step meeting. I had about 60 days in recovery, and I got to this meeting, and it was at this place called the Camel Club in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And the Camel Club was a 12-step recovery clubhouse. It was the kind of place that you would go if you wanted to get lung cancer from secondhand smoke. Okay, that's what it was. And so I would go there every day after work, except on Tuesdays when I had my home group was at another place. So I'd go there every day after work. It was incredibly convenient. I'd go to these meetings and stuff, and I would just go and I would go and I would go. But I go to this one meeting, and I'll never forget. There's this woman in the meeting. And somebody says, you have a topic, and she talks for 45 minutes about running a goose over on the way to the meeting. Okay? And now you got to understand, I'm sitting there, and I'm 60 days in recovery, and I'm tense, and I'm worried about everything, and I'm thinking things like, am I ever going to get my wife back? Is she ever going to forgive me? I'm thinking about the pain that I caused my kids. I'm thinking about all this heavy-duty stuff, and this woman is sobbing about a freaking goose, man. And I'm sitting there, and in my head, I'm losing my mind. I'm literally like, I can't believe this is my life. And I get up, and I leave that meeting, and I say to myself, I'm never going back to one of those meetings again. This is my point. My point with quitting recovery. I'm never going back. I'm better than that. I do not ever need to be subjected to that insanity ever again. But what did I have? I had an individual person to support me. At that time, they didn't have places like Favor. They weren't called coaches. And they still have I had a sponsor. And I called him up. Okay? And he talked me down off the ledge. He simply listened while I went off about this goose story, right? He just listened. And he said, I think you need to go back there again tomorrow. And he talked me through it. Took 7 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it was. But my point is that was one example, and I could tell you many other examples where I was going to be done. And isn't that part, again, think about anything that you've changed in your life. How many times have you started and stopped something? Something not even nearly as important as addiction recovery. Going to the gym. How many people have gone to the gym, started, and been done? How many people have started a diet and then been done? How many people have known the right thing to do and done the wrong thing anyway? No, don't make eye contact. Don't make eye contact. And that's the same experience for the person in recovery. The problem is the stakes are higher. The stakes are higher. So, this is where you have to just have a realistic viewpoint on what's going on. If you don't have a realistic viewpoint, guys, what's going to happen is you're going to feel kicked in the gut. You're still going to feel kicked in the gut when this goes on, but you're really going to be deflated if you set yourself up for this mindset that they got it, rather than a cautious mindset, a cautiously optimistic mindset. Also, the other thing you can do, and this is where you will really, this is where it's going to, this isn't going to be, it's going to be counterintuitive, but you can also concentrate on your own recovery, no matter what they're doing. And you can kind of let them know that as well. I'm working on my recovery. I'm going to my own meeting tonight. I'm going to continue to talk to Rich. I'm going to continue to talk to Carol. I'm going to continue to talk to my coach's Favor. You start to work your own recovery because you can control that. And what are you doing? When you go to a meeting, when your loved one, I think I just heard you in the phone. I don't know who you were talking to. Okay. So Paige's daughter, I overheard this, because it's what I do. I overhear things here at Favor. And I heard her on the phone saying, I got to go to a meeting, honey, I'll call you afterward. And I know what's going on with Paige's daughter, so I assumed it was her. When Paige says, I got to go to a meeting, I got to go to a meeting and work on my recovery. What's the message that's being sent to your loved one? Recovery is important. I'm going to do this regardless of what you're up to. And all that stuff starts to send subconscious messages to us. It starts to, and it also shows that, like, wow, they're taking this seriously. My husband, my wife, my mom, my dad, they're taking this stuff seriously. They're taking a Monday night and going to a meeting themselves. That's the stuff that you can control. While you can't control all this other stuff, none of us can control whether or not our kid comes home on curfew. We really can't. We can try to. Some of us have tried to. Some of y'all, you've done it. You put the tracking device in the car. You've driven by the meeting to see if they were still there at the meeting.
Don't leave the car though.
Yeah. So, all right, let me go through real quick kind of what to expect though from this process, because your loved one is probably at some point in this, so you have, don't get me wrong, you have people that are in active addiction. They're actively using, they may need an intervention, that type of thing. But let's say they enter the recovery process. The very first thing that has to happen is a period of stabilization. Or it'll usually be a withdrawal kind of situation. Maybe they go to rehab, maybe they don't, maybe they do it at home. But they go from using to stopping use, and we call that stabilization. And that's all the basic stuff. Some people will get stabilized several times. Some people get stabilized 19 or 20 times. And every time you go, you're going to get it out of your system. You're going to learn about addiction. You're going to learn what you're dealing with. You're going to start to learn how to manage your anxiety. You're going to learn how to develop responsibility. You're going to learn how to ask for help. Now, I would say that family members go through this as well. When they first realize that something's going on with their loved one, they also go through a period of stabilization. Well, they probably, and very similar to the person who's in addiction, a lot of times family members go through a period of denial. Would you agree with that? Yeah. It's not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening. And then boom, you go through this period of time where you also have to learn about addiction. And you need to ask yourself where you're at in this process. Do I need to, you come to groups like this and you learn about the neurobiology of addiction. Maybe you get some books to read. Anybody have any good books on this topic that they would recommend? Anybody have a good book that they would recommend? Carol?
Mothering Addiction.
Mothering Addiction. Mothering Addiction is a great book. Meg? Codependent No More. Anyone else? You can get into other books like Clean by David Schiff. That's a really good book. Memoir of a Broken Brain, of an Addicted Brain. There's also another one called Broken Brain by Maya Savitz. That's another good book. You can go to Barnes & Noble and go to that section. My gosh, now it's a very popular section. But what are you trying to do whenever you're learning about it? You're literally trying to wrap your mind around what's going on here. What is this thing? And you're going to have some basic questions for yourself. Is this addiction, or is this just kind of out of control use? We know that not everybody who's out of control with their use will become addicted. Yes, Carol?
There is another book that if someone asks about what to do once they start coming home, is Beyond Addiction. It's a great book for thinking about that ahead of time.
You guys hear that one? Beyond Addiction. And then obviously, if you can, come to groups like this, or go. There's also Al-Anon groups and Nar-Anon groups, and maybe there are therapy groups you can go to, or just any kind of opportunity where you're going to get a chance to learn about this stuff. So how long does stabilization last? Some people say, well, it's just detox. It's 7 days. I would say stabilization is probably, if you really want to get down into it, it takes about 90 days to kind of get your head out of the clouds. When I was, that first 90 days, man, it was just like the lights were on, but they were just flickering. It took everything I had in me to kind of go to work and just do what I needed to do, and kind of come home and go to a meeting. And I was real emotional. I was up and down, that kind of thing. I remember coming out of my house and my van had a flat tire in my driveway. Now that is an unfortunate circumstance, but that is not life-threatening by any means, right? We're not on a highway. I wasn't late for anything. It was just a van with a flat tire. I walked over to this thing, and I went back to the trunk to look for that lug thing that takes the lugs chumpies off. You know what I'm talking about? I'm not a car guy, if you don't know. But I know how to change a tire. I couldn't find it, and I had an emotional breakdown. You would have thought that this was like the hardest task and the most life-threatening task that a person could be faced with. What was going on? I was still so early on, and I believe, I didn't know it at the time, but I don't believe my brain had healed enough. I was just emotionally laid by. I was just up and down, that kind of thing. So let's just say, for sake of argument, that's about 90 days. It's somewhat arbitrary. The next task is deepening. It's whenever, this idea of emotional detox is a big deal. This is a big deal. This is, somebody talked about core issues and really getting in touch with what you got going on. Emotional detox is The best example of emotional detox, it's an ugly cry. It's a, you know what I'm talking about? Quiver lip, that kind of stuff. Snot flying everywhere, that kind of thing. Change is an attitude. You'll see people start to change. They'll start to change who they hang out with. They'll start to change the way they carry themselves. You get the ability to tolerate feelings. And again, I think this parallel process going on with family members. You start to move out of the fear a little bit, and you start to think, I'm going to work on my recovery. I'm going to work on how I respond to my kid. That kind of thing. Stage 3. In stage 3, you actually are more committed to the process. You really start to connect with yourself, and you start to connect with other supportive people. The person in recovery starts to become more honest. Stage 4 is integration into the process. This is kind of like where you just kind of live it out in your life. I remember, it's so weird that I remember the 6 things. I used to say 6 things. Let me see if I can remember the 6 things, and I hope nobody from the group is watching. They would be appalled that I can't. So, call your sponsor every day, go to a meeting every day, stay away from people, places, and things. Pray. Help another addict. Don't pick up, listen to how the phrase would go, don't pick up 1 joint, 1 pill, 1 fix for 1 day. Go to a meeting, call your sponsor, stay away from people, places, and things. Help another addict. Pray. Don't pick up 1 joint, 1 pill, 1 fix for 1 day. Those 6 things, 16 years later, are still burned into my head because every single day I check them off. I would be in the car and I would be like, did I do that one? Did I do that one? And then what happened was, all of a sudden I wasn't thinking about it anymore. The analogy is, the classic analogy around habit change or behavior change is brushing your teeth. For a while, as a kid, you teach, brush your teeth, brush your teeth, brush your teeth, and then what happens? You're just automatically brushing your teeth. That's the same idea of the psychological process around recovery. You go, and I remember whenever anything going on, it was always a big deal. I got invited to my first wedding in recovery. Oh, should I go? Should I not go? What are they going to say? What are they going to do? There's going to be alcohol there. I had to go talk to somebody about it. Now I can go anywhere or do anything and not really even be bothered by it. But everything early on was a big deal. And that's kind of called integration. Other people would call that maintenance. Now, you can have a slip at any point in time during this process. Agreed? You can have a slip at any point in time. There's a technical term that's called a recurrence. You can have a recurrence, or you can have a lapse. Let's just call it that. That's different than a full-blown relapse. If I go out tonight and I drink a couple beers and I go out and I smoke some marijuana, and maybe I go out again on Wednesday night or whatever, maybe I go out again next weekend, but I like somebody confronts me on it. Okay? I am not back to a full-blown relapse because I'm not back to all these symptoms, guys. This is very important. A lot of times people call any kind of use a relapse. It's only a relapse if you get back to this level. Okay? So a slip, you can still be moving forward in your recovery. If you have a relapse, and that's a little tougher because now you have a return to this level of problem. And a lot of times people who have a relapse, they have to wind up going back and sort of like maybe getting stabilized again. But you'll have people, and people will say, well, you can't okay a relapse, Rich. You can't okay a lapse. I'm not okay in a lapse. I'm here to tell you that I'm not saying it's okay, but I'm also here to tell you that it's going to happen whether or not I say it or not. I mean, I'm not the one who's going to promote anybody's lapse by saying that lapses happen. They happen every single day with any type of behavior change. The problem with this is these are substances that can kill you. So we have to say it in a way where we want the person to keep coming back, and we want the person not to beat themselves up if they screw up, right? But we also don't want to make it okay because the stakes are so high. But we want, if you have a loved one and they've made a mistake and they've screwed up, or however you want to say it, or let's just say they've had a recurrence, they've slipped up. The deal is just get right back on the horse, get right back on the horse, get right back on the horse, get right. There's no need for a speech. There's no need for any kind of, punishment, that kind of stuff. If they get right back into recovery, then that should be enough. Get right back into recovery, get right back into recovery. That's hard for people because that's not the way we handle it in our society. If a person has a relapse in our society, they go to jail or they get their kids taken away. So it's hard for people to think of it that way. But you get the point with the whole process? The deal is just to get them right back on the horse. So any questions or comments about the stages of recovery? Yes, ma'am.
Is this on the website, all this stuff, or no?
So this, I will put this on my personal website. This won't be on that. This will be on the Recovery Cartel.
Okay.
I have a blog, recoverycartel.com. I would encourage you to go and subscribe to that thing, and it has all kinds of information. It'll have the family groups. There's a bunch of family groups on it. I have a YouTube channel too that is Recovery Cartel. So go there and you can subscribe and you can get all the new information, but you can also see all the videos that I've done over the past 18 months on these different topics. And pretty much anything you can think of related to this, we've done a video on it.
Would you have those 6 things on there too?
Those 6 things, I'll put them on. Yep.
Will you run through them right quick? I'll write them down.
Okay, go to a meeting. All right? Call your sponsor. Stay away from people, places, and things. Pray. Help another addict. Don't pick up one joint, one pill, one fix for one day. Yes. And so that was burned into my mind, man. When I say it was burned into my mind, it was burned into my mind. And I ran my life on that those 6 principles every single day for like, I don't know how long, until it just became automatic. It just became automatic. I don't know when it became automatic, but there was a period of time when I wasn't like, did I do it? Did I get everything? Did I do everything? That kind of stuff. And when you look at that, there's a lot of common sense in those 6 things, right? There's the environmental change, quit hanging out with people who are using. There's the spiritual stuff is included in this. There's one-on-one support because it says call your sponsor. There's group support because it says go to a group. There's the positive feeling you get when you help another person. All of that is built into that. I never knew the wisdom of that. And the dudes who were telling me that, they never knew the wisdom of that. They were just telling me it because that's how they did it. I thank God every day that I wandered into the meeting that I wandered into. I got clean and sober guys in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There were literally thousands of meetings that I could have gone to that night. I could have gone to any other meeting. And I walked into Verona Tuesday night, and I had gone to hundreds of meetings before that, and never felt anything that resembled a connection. See, what we believe is we, as professionals, recovery coaches, organizations like Favor Greenville, society, we need to find a way where we're not leaving it to happenstance. We're not leaving it to serendipity, where Rich just walks in the right place at the right time. And he's real receptive to these guys. What can we do to keep your loved one trying different meetings until he finds his perfect fit? Does that make sense? That's what we got to do. Because there's a perfect fit out there. There's a perfect fit. And the reason there's a perfect fit is because there's so many different options. There's a lot of different options. It isn't that way everywhere, but it's certainly that way in Greenville. It's certainly that way in the upstate. And if you can't find it at a recovery meeting, maybe you can find it with a one-on-one coach. Maybe you can find it with a therapist. That kind of thing. So, all right. What other final topics? Yes.
One thing that you said at a meeting, and it's been a while, but I keep it in my phone, and it's just very encouraging to me. You said 70% success rate in people that persist.
People that persist. 70%. 70% will find recovery if you persist. The problem is 9 out of 10 people will quit the process because of all the things I just described. I told the funny story about the goose lady. That was a real experience for me. That was enough to break me. I'm like, I'm not doing this. I am not coming to a freaking meeting every night at 6 o'clock hanging out with the goose lady. It's not going to happen. But for other people, it could be any number of things. For young people, it could be I went to the meeting and everybody was old. You know, it could be maybe somebody spoke. This happens a lot where somebody will feel like they're offended at a meeting. You'll feel like, maybe somebody said something too direct, or maybe somebody said something mean, or somebody said something judgmental. You got to remember, at a lot of meetings, people will do that because it's not like professionally trained, it's just one person helping another person. Well, if that happens, the key is don't quit. The key is let's go to another meeting and try that one. And if that doesn't work, then let's try this other type of meeting. And if that doesn't work, then we'll go try Celebrate Recovery. And if Celebrate Recovery doesn't work, then we'll come back over to Favor and we'll try Smart Recovery. And I'm telling you, if you keep doing that, you're going to find recovery.
What is Smart Recovery? I see that on y'all's calendar.
So Smart Recovery it's a very specific type of group. It's actually not a Favor group. Now we have a couple facilitators that work for Favor, but it's a cognitive behavioral approach to recovery. It really focuses on identifying your thinking and challenging your own thinking around things like triggers, managing negative emotions, dealing with cravings, those type of things. So it's every Tuesday and Thursday night at 6:30 here at Favor Greenville. Did someone have their hand up over here?
I did.
Yes.
I was just going to ask, kind of backing up, how do you get them to come to that original meeting or that therapy session or whatever?
Most of the time, people have to be coerced to come to that. It has to be like, you're sort of like pulling them in by their ear a little bit. And it usually is around an incident. If you really want to be honest, something happens and somebody's talking and saying, here's what you're doing. You're going in here, or, we're taking the car for a month. And then you get them in. That number, and I'll make sure I grab these cards. We would recommend that you start with a phone call to that number because sometimes that person can help you bridge that gap as well, that kind of thing. We're thinking about adding things at Favor Greenville. We're thinking hard about adding some things related to working with younger people. When I say younger people, I'm talking like 16 to, I'm probably talking like teen up to 19, that kind of thing, whatever that would be, 14 to 19 kind of deal. Because we keep hearing more and more about this, and because we have started this initiative in the schools. So now that we're going in the schools, what we think is going to happen is people are going to start asking us, well, what do we do now? What do we do now? And we don't want to be in the schools saying we don't have anything for you, that kind of thing. So just for sheer entertainment purposes, I'm thinking about running like an 8-week group, where I would have these kids and I would have them as a captive audience, and I would, verbally spar with them for 8 weeks around these issues and around these topics, and then we would bring in a new group. That's sort of what we're leaning toward, and it would be geared to people who aren't quite ready to say, I'm addicted, that kind of thing. All because everything you guys said tonight, if you're dealing with somebody who's in that age range, your concerns and your frustrations are so legit, and it's so it's so difficult. So we feel like what can be done to kind of help all of us deal with that weird. And it's also not only is it the age, it's also that weird in between stage where you're not even exactly sure what's going on. How serious is this? How serious is this not? And then it's all made worse because of some of these substances. So be on the lookout for that, and we'll announce that. We'll put that on our website and stuff like that. So after this meeting, I will grab some of these cards. And anybody else have any other questions or anything else we need to talk about? Yes.
I do have a quick one. What would you suggest we do if we find our stash? Do we throw it away?
Yeah.
Throw it away.
Yeah. Yep. Do not put it in your car and bring it here. People have done that. Yeah. Is it weed?
It's weed, bong, and
yeah. Yeah, I would definitely. The question was, what do you do if you find it? I would get rid of it, that kind of thing.
Would you make them do it?
No, I would do it. I would just do it. And I would let them get mad and all that kind of stuff. And I've been in those situations. I know exactly what you're talking about and stuff like that. But yeah. And it's not going to keep, it may or may not keep them from actually changing down the road, because they may just go find another resource. But what you're doing there is you're just basically saying, and I would do it in a calm way, and it would just be like, look, you can have whatever opinion you want, but I'm not going to act like it's okay. That kind of thing. I feel like we need to do more to help in this area. Not just with you guys, but just in general with that age group. This is getting younger and younger. Yes. It is.
We can't argue with them because I don't have the facts to argue with my
No, and you also
He knows
don't want to do
everything.
that. You don't want to go down
But, I
that
mean, he'll
route.
start trying to explain how acid is really not that bad.
Yes.
And then he'll get in this big thing, and I have nothing to
Yes.
do with it. And
Yes.
you could.
Yes, I probably shouldn't even say this.
Go ahead, come on.
Huh? I have an exercise that I do. If I do the 8-week marijuana group or 8-week verbal sparring group, I do the last thing I do is we do the great marijuana debate. So it's been a while, but basically I am at a podium with a moderator asking questions, and they pick usually it's a young man. They pick a young man to kind of like represent the great marijuana debate, and I represent the other side, and we go back and forth. But I have one thing that I can say at the end, and I've never lost the great marijuana debate because of this. And you have to have the research to back this up when you say your claims. So when he says marijuana actually gives you energy, he has to actually have the research. So I say there are 2 studies out that I want you to know. One is marijuana gives you testicular cancer, and it also, in young boys, it'll make you grow breasts. So if you want your balls to fall off and you want to grow boobs, and every time I've done that, I've won the debate. So, all right, guys, we're done for tonight. Let's close this meeting with the Serenity Prayer, please. If we could get a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease, and for their loved ones brought into this no choice of their own, followed by the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, here are these cards, guys. Grab these cards if you're looking for